There's nobody here, Mom. Oh, nope, there's somebody. Okay. I don't know why I have to do it like 5 times for it to actually work. Good morning.
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 Morning. So I know I got some emails last night about would I extend deadlines. You guys, I will always extend deadlines, but I need you to tell me specifically what assignments and when approximately you think you're going to have them done. So I didn't have, it was a busy night for me and I did not have a chance to respond to everyone. But tell me specifically what assignments and when approximately you'll have them done. And I'll extend them out for you. Other questions or concerns? I know there was, Genesis just had a message there. I can't remember, I didn't read it. What did it say? Genesis, I can't read it. If it was specifically directed towards me, no, I can read now with no voice. Just want to let, that's fine. I understand. It's a lot of illness running around this semester. Looking at the syllabus, I'm realizing that putting the cranial nerves in with lab exercise 20 was not a really good idea. They're both a lot of material. And because we haven't finished covering the brain in class, I don't really want to do them both today. So we're not going to. And as always, what's on the syllabus is, and timing it is negotiable. So we're not going to do lab exercise 21. We're also, I would prefer to not do this lab right here, this autonomic nervous system structure and function. Let me think about whether or not we'll do that. I need to think about it. But we are only going to do today, we're only going to do lab exercise 20. And let me think about what we'll do. Yeah, we're a week behind because I misscheduled for one of the days that was fall break. We weren't supposed to have lab and I had it written in. That is why we're a week behind. But let me think about whether or not to either do this lab next week or do this lab next week. One of them we won't do. I just have to think about which one not to do. But we will do lab exercise 20 today. I am going to open up the lab quest 4 for you. I haven't done it yet. It will cover, let's see, it will cover 16 I think it was 16, 17, and 19. We didn't do 18. One of those I'll have to look and see which one we didn't do. But I think we did 16, 17, and 19. And lab exercise 20. And it will open sometime this evening. Not opening yet. Are there any questions first?
What lab is due Wednesday?
What lab is due Wednesday? Whatever lab we cover today, which is lab exercise 20.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's the way it works every time. They're due, whatever labs we do today are due next week. Yep, today are due next week at midnight on Wednesday night.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. Other questions, concerns, thoughts? And let me actually look really quickly here. So we did 16, 17, and 19. We just didn't do 18. So the Lab Quest 4 that's coming out today is going to cover lab exercises 16, 17, 19, and 20. And if I don't open it today, it won't be due next Wednesday. It'll be due next Friday, and I'll send out an email saying that. Any other thoughts? We are a little behind in lecture. I do want to spend a little bit of time with it if we have time today going over it. But one thing that I'm taking into account is that the special senses is actually a very short chapter. Takes less than a day. And the sorry, bear with me. The autonomic nervous system is a very short chapter also. Sorry, my face is itching here. So some of this will be new stuff because we haven't finished covering the brain. Some of it will be stuff you've seen before. The lab exercise 20 starts with the surface anatomy of the brain. If we're looking at the brain, we've got two hemispheres, two cerebral hemispheres. There's one dividing point separating the two hemispheres, the longitudinal cerebral fissure, or the longitudinal fissure. And then there's the central sulcus right here. One thing that you'll understand from this chapter is that sulci are like internal folds where the brain is folding internally. Gyri are the tops of the folds. So the central sulcus is a major fissure. It separates the frontal lobe from the parietal lobes. Here's the anterior surface. Here's the anterior, here's the posterior. Looking at the side here, we have one more major sulcus, the lateral sulcus, which is going to separate the temporal lobe from the parietal lobe and the frontal lobe. Do you remember what were the bones of the cranium? Somebody tell me, what were the bones of the cranium?
You have a temporal bone.
Temporal bone.
Frontal.
Frontal bone.
Try out. I can't even say it.
Parietal.
Yes, I was like,
Yes,
I had it set in my head, and then when I went to go speak, it
Parietal
murdered
bone.
it.
I wrote parietal bone and what else?
Frontal, or was that already said?
That was already
Occipital.
said. Occipital. So those are the three main bones. Well, guess what? The lobes are named the same thing. Here's the frontal lobe. Here's the parietal lobe, which is right. The parietal bone would be right here. The temporal bone is over on the side, and the occipital bone is in the back. We have one more lobe of the brain that's actually internal. It's inside, and it's called the insula. But for the four of the lobes, they're named according to the bones that overset them, or those bones were named according to the lobe names. We have the brain stem that's going to lead down into the spinal cord. And we have a cerebellum. Cerebrum means brain. Cerebellum means little brain. We're going to find out that the cerebellum has a lot of functions. Are there any questions about this? So here's another picture. Here's the central sulcus. One thing that we have here that we didn't have on the last slide, here's the precentral gyrus. So precentral meaning before. So this is the gyrus before the central sulcus. So precentral gyrus. And the postcentral gyrus meaning after the central sulcus. Lateral sulcus. We have some more different other things that are pinned, other things that are labeled that are part of the brain stem. The pons, the medulla oblongata, so one more time, this will be the frontal lobe. This area right here, frontal lobe, up till the central sulcus. The parietal lobe, about right here to about right here. The occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe right here. And the insula is on the inside. So the precentral gyrus is part of the frontal lobe. The postcentral gyrus is part of the parietal lobe. Talked about the meninges before, but remember that they're continuous, brain and spinal cord have the same meninges. We have spaces in the spinal cord that we don't have in the brain, like an epidural space. But the meninges are continuous. So here we have on the very surface. Do you remember what that was on the very surface? It's on the very surface of the spinal cord too. What is it? That's not labeled here. Someone tell me. Actually, it is labeled here. Read the slide, it's here.
The arachnoid matter?
Actually, on the very, very surface. You're close, but on the very, very surface. What's
the pia mater?
The pia mater. The next one, like Erin said, is the arachnoid mater. Then there's a subarachnoid space. What's in the subarachnoid space? It's found in the subarachnoid space here. It's found in the subarachnoid space in the spinal cord. What is it?
Cerebral spinal fluid?
Correct. And on top of that is the dura mater. So DAP from the internal surface to the outer surface, DAP, dura mater, arachnoid mater, pia mater. Top layers, we'll talk, when we talk about muscles, we'll talk about the fact that there's an epicranial aponeurosis, a sheet of dense, irregular connective tissue. And there's a layer of loose connective tissue and the periosteum of the cranium. Remember what the periosteum is. It's the most outer lining of bones. The dura is going to extend into fissures and form double layered folds, the dura mater. The false cerebri is going to extend in to the longitudinal fissure. The tentorium cerebelli is going to be a covering that's going to separate the cerebellum from the cerebrum. I like to think of it as a tent covering the cerebellum, and that's the way that I remember that one. The false cerebelli is going to be similar to the false cerebri in that it's going to separate the two halves of the cerebellum. I'm going to try, and we'll see how well it works, but I like to show, if I can find cadaver pictures online, I like to show them because sometimes the diagrams don't do it justice. A lot of times they're helpful, but they don't do it justice for just exactly what you're looking at. So here's the dura mater. Right underneath it would be the arachnoid mater. Right underneath it on the surface would be the pia mater. Remember that the dura mater has it forms these double layered folds. So it's two layers. Remember, it has a meningeal layer and a periosteal layer. And in between those two layers are some sinuses. The one that goes down the longitudinal fissure is the superior sagittal sinus. The one that is in the tentorium cerebelli area is a transverse sinus. This is cerebellum. This is cerebrum. So if you look at this area, it's very dark. Why do you think it's so dark? Somebody tell me, why do you think it's so dark? Don't think too hard about this. Let me call on someone. Bianca, why do you think it's so dark?
You said the cerebellum.
This right here, the sinuses right here and the transverse sinuses. Why do you think they're so dark?
I'm not sure.
Can you take a guess? What do you think is contained in them that would make them look so dark?
I would think, I kind of want to say like gray matter, but I feel like I'm wrong.
It's not, you're close. How about we say it's blood?
Okay.
Yeah, she says, okay, whatever you say. It's blood. So we will learn, so the cerebral spinal fluid, it's going to circulate, and it's actually going to, it comes from the blood, it's going to be returned to the blood and be circulated again using the superior sagittal sinus and the transverse sinus, specifically more the superior sagittal sinus. So this is major ways in which the brain receives blood, and this is where it drains. So the cerebral spinal fluid is going to be secreted by the choroid plexus, which is formed from ependymal cells in the neuroglia, ependymal cells of the neuroglia that are covering for the choroid plexus that's found lining the ventricles. And it gets reabsorbed into the blood in the sinuses. So it's formed in the ventricles, on the lining of the ventricles, or that's ependymal cells that make up a choroid plexus. And it's going to get reabsorbed again into the bloodstream in the sinuses, specifically in the superior sagittal sinus. So here we have let's go do this one more time. Here we have the cerebrum. Here we have the superior sagittal sinus. Remember what is a sagittal section?
Side to side.
Yeah, or yeah, side to side. So cutting on a side section. So that's why we call this the superior sagittal sinus. First, it's on the very top of the head, and then it's a sagittal cut. Transverse sinus is horizontal, and it's separating the cerebrum from the cerebellum. So here we have the ventricles, two lateral ventricles. We have an interventricular foramen, which is separating the two lateral ventricles from the third ventricle. Or it's like the interventricular foramen is a conduit from the lateral ventricles into the third ventricle. The third ventricle here. Here's the two lateral ones. Here's the cerebral aqueduct. Sorry, cerebral aqueduct right here. Here's the fourth ventricle. So we have 4 ventricles. And then the central canal. Where's the central canal? Where have you heard that word before?
In bone.
Close. I think you're thinking like the you're
Oh,
right.
the nerves.
No, wait, there is a central canal there. You're right. Where else could it be? You're right. There's one in the center of each osteon. Where else could it be? I think you were going to say it and I interrupted you.
Nerves.
How about in
Or
the...
not,
Go ahead, Rachel.
go ahead.
Nope, go ahead. Say it. You were going to say it.
I was going to say, I don't think I was going to say the right word, so you can go ahead.
You're right. No, it's the spinal cord. You're right. So this is continuous with the central canal in the spinal cord. The septum pellucidum. Well, it's septum, meaning it's just like the septum in your nose, it's separating the two halves of your nose. In this case, it's separating the lateral ventricles. So here's one lateral ventricle, here's the other lateral ventricle, here's the septum. Is the septum pellucidum in a sagittal section model. Right here, right deep to it in this model is the lateral ventricles. So the septum pellucidum is going to separate the two ventricles. Another, a frontal section. Here's your septum pellucidum. Here's your two lateral ventricles. And if you look at those two ventricles, they have this like horn-like shaped. They look like ram's horns. So right here is the tip. We're looking at the sagittal section. Right here's the inferior horn of the two lateral ventricles. Here's the cerebral aqueduct, the third ventricle. The interventricular foramen. I know this is a little blurry. Right here, and we'll talk about this here in a moment. This is the corpus callosum, which is connecting the two hemispheres. It's a lot of white matter that's between the two hemispheres. And in this sagittal model here, it's this right here. Questions so far? Well, here we're essentially looking at this, but it's not specifically just indicating the septum pellucidum right here. So the cerebrospinal fluid is going to be secreted in the ventricles via the coating along the ventricles is the choroid plexus, which is made of ependymal cells of the neuroglia. And it's going to circulate, and then it's going to get reabsorbed into the bloodstream in the sinuses. So yeah, these slides get a little smushed together. This is what D2L does to them, and I apologize for that. But the cerebrospinal fluid secreted into the choroid plexus. It flows through the interventricular foramina here. That's right here. Into the third ventricle, which is right here. The choroid plexus in the third ventricle continues to add more cerebrospinal fluid. And the cerebrospinal fluid flows down the cerebral aqueduct. Cerebral aqueduct into the fourth ventricle. It then flows around two lateral apertures and two medial apertures. And it fills the subarachnoid space, which we've talked about. We've talked about this a lot. At the arachnoid villi, these little penetrations up here. Here's the arachnoid mater. Here's the subarachnoid space. Arachnoid villi that are going to protrude into the dura mater. It's going to get reabsorbed. So it starts here, moves down the interventricular foramen into the third ventricle. Then it moves down the cerebral aqueduct into the fourth ventricle. Then it moves through the two lateral apertures and two median apertures into the subarachnoid space. So it moves from simplify it down, the fourth ventricle. From the fourth ventricle, it moves into the subarachnoid space. And at the arachnoid villi, it's going to get reabsorbed. And then it'll get secreted again from the blood. Questions about the circulation? So here's a picture. Here we're looking at the longitudinal fissure. So this picture right here, it's a cross section right here. So here's the arachnoid villi, the dura mater. Remember, there's two folds of it. So here's the meningeal layer. Here's the periosteal layer. Here's the superior sagittal sinus. And just to orient you, and I'm sorry I'm flipping back and forth here a little bit. This is this. So this is actually the picture we're looking at right now. That slide is looking at this right here. So here's the superior sagittal sinus. Here's the longitudinal fissure, cerebral cortex. The subdural space. Technically, you don't have, in a healthy, normal individual, you do not have a subdural space. Let me, I'm going to give you an example here. One of my favorite, I like to read. I like more than anything at this point in my life, and right now while I'm as busy as I am during the semester, I read a lot of audiobooks, and I go through a lot of audiobooks. My mother can tell you I'm always listening to one. And one of my ultimate favorite authors was Robert Ludlum. And I don't know if you're familiar with him or not. Any of you familiar with him?
No.
Okay. Chances are he died before many of you were born anyway. But he wrote The Born Identity. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, most people are. So that was his book. That was one of the books he wrote, was The Born Identity. And he died right about the same time the Born Identity movie was going to open up into the screens. On the one starring Matt Damon, who is by far the top when it comes to Jason Bournes. There's never going to be a better Jason Bourne. But he died right about the same time that movie was entering the theaters. And he died of a subdural hematoma. What does that mean? If someone dies of a subdural hematoma, what does that mean?
It's below the dura mater and there's a pooling of blood underneath. So basically, veins burst and they bled into their head.
Right. Right. And what it is, and let's look at it this way, Erin, it's bleeding in the subdural space because it's bleeding right underneath the dura mater. And so technically there is not a subdural space here, but you create a space when it bleeds. Another person who passed away of a bleed like that, I've got to remember his name. Shoot. Arnold, what was his name? Little short black guy. And Arnold, give me 1 second here. I'm going to Google him. Because you may or may not know who he is. And if you don't, you should look at some of his acting abilities because he was pretty amazing. Bear with me. Starred in a really old show, showing my age here. Different Strokes. Arnold. Or Arnold. I would really like it if they showed his name. And I may not even have the right name. His name may have been something else. Gary Coleman. Do you remember, did you ever see Gary Coleman? Let me give you a bigger picture that's not so little as this one. This guy?
I have, yes.
Okay. So he died, and I'm gonna make sure, I think it was an epidural bleed. One of the highest paid, let's see, early life, financial, legal issues, death. Paisley, stop. Let's see here. Paisley, stop.
It's like the second sentence to the last of the first paragraph, and it says seizures and suffering and epidermal hematoma.
Yes, what he did, so it was an epidural hematoma, like Rachel said. From what I remember reading the newspaper article, and what it said is that he had an accident in his kitchen and went back and hit his head on the floor. That is often how epidural and subdural hematomas come about, is you get hit on the head. That's one of the reasons that we like to know about the meninges, is because it will often, if you look at those, if it's an epidural, it's going to be above the dura mater, right? If it's a subdural, it's going to be underneath the dura mater. And if there's pressure there, pressure because of blood flow there, it's going to cause damage, even if it doesn't leak into the tissue, because pressure is going to push things around. So dura mater, subdural space, superior sagittal sinus with the arachnoid villi moving into it. Subarachnoid space, arachnoid mater, and pia mater. Questions? Here's the superior sagittal sinus. Remember, here's the longitudinal fissure. And the superior sagittal sinus is made of the falx cerebri. Here's the tentorium cerebelli, which the cerebellum would be about right here. The transverse sinus. Remember that separating the cerebrum from the cerebellum. The internal jugular vein is where it's going to flow back down into the heart. Stop. Guys, hear my teaching assistant barking? There's someone outside and she's needing to bark. Oh. Questions? So the cerebrum, largest and most conspicuous part of the human brain. It's a site of sensory perception, memory, thought, judgment, and voluntary actions, motor actions. It's probably the organ that we're most fascinated with, but the least understood. The cerebral cortex, remember the cortex is an outer surface. So the cerebral cortex or neocortex is a gray matter covering that covers the surfaces of the hemispheres. Neural integration takes place here. Remember, we talked about neural integration when we were talking in chapter 12, where we receive so much information and make a decision about how we'll respond or if we'll respond. That's occurring here in the gray matter. The cerebral gray matter is composed of neuronal cell bodies and dendrites. Where are the axons? Somebody tell me, where are the axons?
Spinal cord?
Well, they're in the spinal cord, but they're also here. Where are they here? They're in the white matter because they're myelinated. So the purple here is the gray matter. Paisley, stop. The white matter is the myelinated axons. So the cerebral gray matter is composed of neuronal cell bodies and dendrites. And it contains 14 to 16 billion neurons. The gyri increase the surface area for neuronal cell bodies. Have a lot of surface area in the brain. They say that the more smart, the smarter an organism is or an animal is, the more folds they have in their cerebellum. Excuse me, in their cerebrum, in their cerebral cortex. From what I've heard, and I've honestly never seen it yet, but a duck's brain is very smooth on top. So the more folds, because you have to, the more surface area you need, because that's where the cell bodies are. So that's where the integration is going to occur. The white matter, which is most of the volume of the cerebrum, is the neuroglia and myelinated nerve fibers, aka axons, that transmit signals on the white matter. The tracts are bundles of nerve fibers in the central nervous system. So all of these cell bodies that are on the surfaces here are being connected to other cell bodies via the axons. Remember, this is the same way we see the same thing as we did when we were talking about the nervous system. I'm sorry. We're seeing dendrites that are synapsing with axons here. And so multiple dendrites synapsing with multiple axons, and the dendrites belong to cell bodies. So this is where all of those synapses are occurring. The intercommunication between them and the tracks, the roadmaps between different areas of the brain is occurring in the white matter. Any questions? So the two hemispheres of the cerebrum are connected by a fibrous tract called the corpus callosum. This is white matter, and it's heavily white matter. Lots of white matter. Very heavily myelinated. Here's the lateral ventricles. Here's the lateral ventricle here. Here's the fourth ventricle. And the third ventricle approximately right in here. The third ventricle, the fourth ventricle. No, let's just go with these being the lateral ventricles, this being the third. So we talked about this initially, but each hemisphere has 5 lobes. 4 are named for the cranial bones that overlie them. The frontal bone, the parietal lobe, the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe. Here's your central sulcus. Here's the precentral gyrus. Here's the postcentral gyrus. Here's the occipital lobe. Here's the temporal lobe. Here's the insula on the inside. A summary of their different functions. Frontal lobes involved in abstract thought, illicit memory, mood, motivation, foresight and planning, decision-making, emotional control, social judgment, voluntary motor control, and speech production. Parietal lobe is involved in taste, somatic sensation, sensory integration, visual processing, so processing what you see, spatial perception, language processing, and numerical awareness. Occipital lobe is involved in visual awareness and visual processing. You see, there's some overlap here. Visual processing in the parietal lobe, visual processing in the occipital lobe. There is always some overlap here. The temporal lobe is involved in hearing, smell, emotion, learning, language comprehension, memory consolidation, verbal memory, visual and auditory memory, and language. The insula, this most inner lobe that I don't know how long ago it was discovered, but it's probably the one we least, the least amount about. But it's involved in taste, visceral sensation, consciousness, emotion and empathy, and cardiovascular homeostasis. Looking at the general brain here, Here's our occipital lobe. Parietal lobe, frontal lobe, and temporal lobe. And then the insula is on the inside. Different functions have been mapped to different parts of the cerebral cortex. We'll spend a lot of time in lecture talking about what each of these do. But overall, the way it works is the primary, let me give you an example. Primary visual association cortex, primary visual cortex is where you first see something. You first consciously see something. That's where that's processed. Your visual association area is from what you've seen in the past or what you've seen recently. It's going to identify and generalize what you're seeing. So let me give you an example. My dog, my teaching assistant here, snoring on my lap. You see a dog, you see something. That's your primary visual cortex. Your visual association cortex is, what have I seen in the past that helps me identify what I'm looking at now? Well, you've seen other dogs in the past. She's probably a dog because she looks like the other dogs. Primary auditory cortex. I'm hearing something. What have I heard in the past that helps me identify what I'm hearing now? That allows me to identify what I'm hearing now. Primary gustatory, so this is taste. Tasting now, association area, I'm guessing that is probably in the insula because that's where taste occurs. Wernicke's area is language comprehension, understanding what's being said to you. Broca area or Broca's area is being able to use the muscles in your mouth to say what you want to say. Using your voice box correctly to say what you want to say. And getting those muscles to work correctly and getting the right motor skills correctly to say what you want to say. So you hear it with the primary auditory cortex. It's analyzed in the Wernicke area. And the way you respond is going to be formulated in the Broca's area. We'll talk about that again in a second here. Somatosensory is heat, temperature, pain. So temperature, pain, and deep touch. Somatosensory association area is identifying what you're feeling. Primary motor cortex. I decide I'm going to start to move, walk somewhere. Well, how am I going to walk? Am I going to walk fast? Am I going to walk slow? Am I going to walk or am I going to crawl? That's occurring in the motor association area. This first area, all right, let me say this. How am I going to walk? That the primary motor is how am I going to walk? Motor association is smoothing that out. Walking fast, walking slow. Is that clear? So the primary is the first area that you sense it and something. The association area is narrowing it down and identifying it. So with this in mind, the frontal lobe has the primary motor cortex in it, which is involved in voluntary muscle movement, deciding what you're going to do. The premotor or the association motor area is planning and coordinating that movement. This has to do with judgment, thoughts, moods. Sorry. So here's the precentral, here's the central sulcus. So this is the precentral gyrus, which is your primary motor cortex. On the other side of the central sulcus is, and of course I'm in the, I mixed up the slides, but it's going to be the primary somatosensory cortex. Remember, that's related to temperature, pain, proprioception also. Temperature, pain, proprioception, and some touch. Temporal lobe. Primary auditory, being aware of something you hear. My dog starts to bark. I hear barking. Let's say it like that. Primary auditory cortex, I hear barking. I'm aware of it. Well, what is it? It's a sound. I'm sorry, let me start over here. I hear a sound. Auditory association cortex. Well, what is that sound? How, comparing it to what I've heard in the past, analyzing it, understanding and recognizing it based on what you've heard before. And so I know that that sound is my dog barking because I've heard it before. Wernicke's area is being able to comprehend and understand written and spoken language. You guys, let's take 10 minutes. We'll come back at 10:48 here and continue on here. Tarek, are you here?
Yes.
Okay. I am sorry, I did not get this done last night. I want to see really quickly if I can do an override for you right now. And
Okay.
now that I'm thinking about it, I need something from you.
Okay.
What is your ID number, your student ID?
Ooh, okay, give me 1 second. I need
Okay.
to pull that up.
I'm sorry, I was in Baltimore, so I teach for Stevenson too, and I was in Baltimore when I read your email, and now I'm realizing I couldn't have tried to do it last night anyway because I didn't have your student ID.
Okay, so my ID, whenever you're ready.
I'm ready.
H019.
H and realize I'm hearing impaired, so I'm gonna 019. You see what I'm typing in, right?
Here I can pull, yes, and then it's gonna be 29658.
29658. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm not sure if you need the H or not.
Well,
But-
let's put it in anyway. Let's just see what happens. You've entered an invalid ID. Let's try one more time.
okay, so then we'll just do that without the H then. See if
Okay.
that works.
You've entered an
Interesting.
invalid ID.
019299658.
Let's try something else. Tarek, what's your last name?
QUR.
It's Qureshi, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
QUR. It's R before E.
R before E.
And then SHI. Yep.
Okay. Let's do this. Let's put in both just to see what it does. You're not authorized to access information on the student.
Interesting.
All right, let's try it one more time.
Oh, it says remember to enter in capital H. So
a
for the
all right,
student
let's
ID.
try something that H
And then
H019
29658.
29658. Okay. USR. Not a student for the selected term.
That's weird.
Let's see here.
Oh, it's for you see the top right hand corner where it says your name. It says for spring 2021.
Oh, did it?
Yeah.
All right. You know what? I am not really alert this morning.
I don't know how to. I've been trying to go through this whole system and having a little issues. So that's
well, I know I can make it work if it lets me because I've done it before. The perks of online classes is you don't have to limit things to 24 students. You don't have to limit a class.
So yeah, it'd be spring 2022.
Is it on here?
Yeah, it's the first one after the
I
non-credits.
see it now. Let's try this again. H is a student. Yep, there you are. Okay. What gonna do? Do you? Oh, it's 122. That's
it's 122,000.
Now I know I have to do something else here, so just a sec. Capacity override. Submit. Submit. I probably didn't have to do that late registration because you're not registering late, but I did it anyway because that's what I've always done. You entered have been saved successfully.
Nice. Yep, and then I can web register. So
awesome.
I just registered and I'm good.
Well, now I'm glad we just did it. That was a lot easier than me trying to email you and finding out your.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was like, I saw also, it's like one of the only classes, it's 1 day a week. And I need with my schedule, it's probably easier to just allot longer days, but less days kind of thing. So
Eric, can I ask you really quick? Do you know what specific date is it?
Today.
No, that class. When is it? What date and time is it?
Let me check. It's Friday, and hold on, I'll pull it up really quick. Spring 2022. Instructions. So what it is it's Friday 8 a.m. to 10:40 a.m.
Okay.
And then there's like a block where there's nothing, and then it's 12 noon to 2:40.
Awesome. I appreciate saying that, because initially what I was supposed to be teaching was 2 121 courses.
Okay.
And that's what I was told. And then I found out otherwise. And I'm fine with this. I'm happy to be teaching it. But I didn't know which was which. And so I appreciate you telling me, because now I know.
Yeah, so it's just one day a week, but it's about 5 hours.
It's kind of an all-day course.
Yeah, which is honestly, I prefer, like, I don't know. My whole thing is like, if I have like a couple classes like scattered out, it's just easier for my schedule kind of thing. I can pick up more hours at work and not like, it's hard with my availability right now because the job I work is during mornings.
Right.
So it's really hard to like pick up, like when I say my availability is half of the weekdays, it's like kind of hard for them to schedule me. So I was just trying to pick up more hours in the spring semester.
I can understand that.
I'm sorry. This is Bianca. I'm just being nosy. I you guys talking, but I wasn't physically seeing. What class are you guys talking about?
Well, see, I'm going to be teaching one section of 122 in the spring. And he wanted into that course, and it's full. But because it's an online course, I don't have to cap the number of students in it.
Okay.
And that's what we were doing, was just getting him in there.
I was just like, oh, what class is this?
Yeah, it's like the next class after this. It's like all the chapters we didn't do in the book this semester, I imagine we're doing in that same book next semester.
Mary, can you add me to your class?
Rachel,
because it was full.
Really?
We can do it after class.
Nope. Let's do it while we're doing this really quick. Right, because then it will get done.
Okay.
Wait. Give me 1 second here. Gotta go back.
I'm sorry that I opened this can of worms.
No,
I apologize for not registering.
I know you're in the middle of a lot of chaotic things. So when you showed up right there, I thought I should just do this right now.
Yeah, after this weekend, it'll be all over, regardless if I want it to be or not. So that's the light at the end of the tunnel that I have.
Rachel, what's your student ID number?
It's H0185.
Wait, I'm sorry, I'm hearing impaired, so give me 1 second. H01
8.
Start
5.
from the very beginning.
Okay, it's H0185 1634.
All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So you should be able to do it in 1 second here. Yes, see if it works for you now. If it doesn't work for you, let me know after class and we'll get you in. Because in the classroom, they have to limit it to like 24 students. When it's online, because we don't have a capacity with how many students can be in a classroom, it's not limited. All right, so let's come back to this. So Rachel, that class, did he tell you what time that class was?
Yes, he did.
Okay, because of the way my head works. I'm sorry, I wanted to make sure that you knew. So the parietal lobe, so we were right here talking about the temporal lobe. And of course it went to the very beginning. So primary auditory, you hear something. Auditory association area, assessing what you're hearing. Have you heard it before? What does it sound like? Can you identify the sound based on what you've heard before? Wernicke's area is comprehending and understanding written and spoken language based on what you've heard before and what you've seen before. So the Wernicke's area would be very much involved in learning to read in association with the primary visual cortex. It's back here, and the visual association area, just right here. So the parietal lobe, primary somatosensory, so awareness of somatic senses, so touch, pain, and temperature. So remember that here's the central sulcus. This is the postcentral gyrus, which is the primary somatosensory cortex also. The precentral gyrus was the primary motor cortex. So primary is always being first aware. Association is identifying it for what it is, based on what you've seen before. Somatosensory association cortex also includes memory, processing, and analyzing those, recognition of those sensations, and proprioception. Posterior association area. Posterior association area. Visual, auditory, somatosensory areas meet here, special awareness of the body. So comprehending something based on interacting your visual senses with your auditory senses, with your somatosensory senses to identify things. You're at a park. You look around, it looks like other parks you've seen before. You hear the screeching of the swing set in the background. Not the screeching, the squeaking of the metal of this swing set. You can feel the grass under your feet. And therefore you know you're in a park. Is this coming together the way this works? Someone tell me they're understanding what I'm saying.
I understand.
Okay. So primary visual cortex, being aware of visual stimuli. I see a door, I'm looking at something. That's my primary visual cortex. My visual association cortex is what am I looking at? Identifying what I'm looking at. Well, I'm looking at a doorknob. And the reason I know it's a doorknob and the reason I know I'm looking at a doorknob is it looks like other doorknobs that I've seen in the past. Now, the neat thing about all these different functional areas is they interact with one another to form higher brain functions. So the sum of all the parts and the capacity of your brain to work is much greater than the sum of all the parts because of the way they interact. So higher brain functions, sleep, memory, cognition, emotion, sensation, motor control, language. These are interactions between the cerebral cortex and basal nuclei, which we'll talk about in a moment, movement, the brainstem, and the cerebellum. The functions, these general functions of the brain, do not have really designated clear boundaries. The integrative functions mainly focus on the cerebrum, but may involve the combined action on multiple brain levels. So passively viewing words on a sheet is going to take place in the primary visual cortex. Speaking words is going to occur in the Broca's area and a little bit in the primary motor cortex. Actually, I'm sorry. I'm wrong here. Speaking words, the motor control is the motor cortex. Generating verbs is going to be in the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area. So interactions of these different areas. Passively viewing them, listening to them is going to involve the auditory cortex for you to hear them and the Wernicke's area. Speaking the words, your muscle control is going to involve your primary motor cortex and some of your motor association cortex. Generating the verbs is going to involve the Wernicke's area and the Broca's area. So understanding language and responding. The primary auditory cortex. Primary auditory cortex. Auditory association is also going to be involved here because you have to comprehend what you're hearing. Then evaluating individual words and connecting them together to understand what's being said to you. Wernicke's area. Broca's area. Responding back. Signaling to organs of speech. You can understand why this is probably the most fascinating organ, but it's also the least understood. Questions so far? So you hear it. Your auditory association area is going to say, look, it's a language. Your Wernicke's area this is putting one word in front of the next with regards to what you're hearing. This is what's being said. And this is how you're going to respond. The more internal working, the diencephalon. Major organs of the diencephalon are the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the epithalamus. If you put these in context with what we've already looked at, the ventricles. Here's the fourth ventricle. Here's the cerebral aqueduct. Here's the third ventricle. Here's the lateral ventricles out here. But this area that's also has the third ventricle in it is the thalamus. The epithalamus is right here. This little gland right here is called the pineal gland. P-I-O. We'll see it here in a moment, but it's a pineal gland. As I'm not typing anything. Gland, which is involved in your circadian rhythms. So when you decide you're going to go to bed at night, what allows you to get tired? Do you know, a lot of us take this as a supplement, dietary supplement. What is it?
Melatonin.
Melatonin. See, everyone knows what it is. It's secreted by the pineal gland. You look outside, you recognize that it's getting dark, and you start to get a little tired because your pineal gland starts secreting melatonin. And of course, I can't manage to spell rhythm. Let's see, rhythm, U-M. That's not it. T-H. That's not right either. All right, I'm giving up with spelling rhythm right now, but it secretes melatonin. So here, remember, lateral ventricle right here. The third ventricles would be right here. Fourth ventricle right here. Cerebral aqueduct right here. With that in mind, here's the thalamus right here, this area. Here's the epithalamus with the pineal gland. Here's the hypothalamus, which is attached to the pituitary gland, which sits in the sella turcica. You remember that from looking at the base of the skull? The sella turcica sits in that little Turkish saddle. And the optic chiasm, which is where the cranial nerves are going to cross. So this is essentially an enlargement of this. I'm sorry, this right here is enlarged right here. One thing that we don't see here that you keep in mind, right? If we had something right here that's not labeled, would be right here, would be the septum pellucidum that would separate the two ventricles, the two lateral ventricles. So here's essentially all of that put together with some other items. Here's the pituitary gland. Here's the hypothalamus. Here's the epithalamus. Here's the pineal gland. Here's the thalamus. Right here is the septum pellucidum. This right here is the choroid plexus of the third ventricle. So it's what's secreting cerebral spinal fluid into the third ventricle. A little mass right here, which is called the intermediate mass of the thalamus. On the very back here, and we'll talk about it here in a second, are the corpora quadrumina, the cerebral aqueduct. Remember, we're looking at a sagittal section here. Here's the mammillary bodies. Here's the pons. Here's the medulla oblongata. Limbic system is an important center for emotion and learning. It's absolutely amazing how much emotions are involved in learning. A lot of times in class, I will try to share, emotional stories with you. I'll try to share funny stories with you. I'll try to share graphic stories with you as examples. Because funny, sad, scary, or disturbing examples are an amazing way to learn. And the reason is because your emotions are so tied to your learning via this limbic system. So your limbic system is found in each hemisphere. It includes the cingulate gyrus, which arches over the corpus callosum. Here's your corpus callosum. Here's your cingulate gyrus. Your hippocampus, which is you're in the medial temporal lobe, and it's involved in memory functions. It's short-term memory. Your cerebral cortex is long-term memory. Your amygdala is involved in emotional functions. Your mammillary bodies are involved in recollection learning, recalling from past what you've learned. Your hypothalamus, and we'll talk about it more in a second, but that's your master coordinator of your endocrine system. If you've ever, what's an idea? We'll wait on that. So your limbic system consists of portions of the frontal lobe, portions of the temporal lobe, your hypothalamus, your thalamus. Remember your thalamus, and we'll see it again in a second, is your gateway. Remember how so many of the second order neurons synapsed on the thalamus for sensory? So And it tends to be the gateway for both motor and sensations, motor skills and sensation neurons. The basal nuclei, which is involved in movement, and other deep nuclei. And it's also associated with your sense of smell. A lot of, maybe we'll see it more when we talk about it later, but your sense of smell is very much involved in your ability to remember things. You saw my panoramic X-ray. I had a lot of surgeries growing up. And the reason I tell you this is because when we started wearing masks during the pandemic, I really struggled with it because I don't like wearing things over my face. I don't like wearing masks, period. And a lot of that comes from the fact that when I was really young, I had a lot of surgeries. And what do they do to put you under? They stick a mask on your face. And I remember that being very associated with something very frightening, that smell and that mask. And I hate them even to this day. Like, I'll wear masks right now because I've gotten used to it, but I hate wearing masks. I don't like those oxygen gas masks. Blah, yuck. And when I go to the doctor's office, when I even go to a dentist's office, there's other people who love the gas. I hate it. I hate it. I don't like feeling out of control. And that's the way that makes me feel. And if you ever remembered what it's like when you're put under by the gas, things get very blurry, your sight gets very blurry, all the noises in the room start to get very loud. And it makes you feel like you're going crazy. And I hate that. And anything that smells anything like that upsets me and makes me feel uptight. And for example, if you've ever seen the can insulators, those things that they put pop cans in that are made of that foam, you've ever smelled the inside of those? To me, it smells like anesthesia. And I hate the way it smells. And it upsets me every time. And it's because I've learned to associate that smell and that feeling with something that I fear. That's your limbic system. When I go to the dentist now, I just tell them to give me the shots, and I have really weird feeling in my mouth because of how many things I've had done to my mouth and then breaking my jaw. And so a lot of times they can do things without anesthesia for me and I won't feel it anyway. But I would prefer they just don't ever do gas with me because it upsets me so badly every time anyway. But that's all involved with your limbic system. So your limbic system controls emotions, produces feelings, interprets sensory impulses, and facilitates memory storage and retrieval and learning. This is your motivational system. The thalamus is the gateway to the cerebral cortex. So sensory fibers, the first order nuclei, actually, it would be the second order nuclei. The second order nuclei are going to synapse in the thalamic nuclei and are relayed to a particular area of the cerebral cortex to be interpreted. The motor information from the cerebellum is also going to be relayed through the thalamus to the primary motor area. Remember where that is. So that's the precentral gyrus of the cerebral cortex. So your thalamus is your gateway to your cerebral cortex. All of the fibers are going to, many, if not all of the fibers are going to run through it. The thalamus is the control center for hormone secretion, regulating to the secretion of hormones from the anterior pituitary that regulate growth, metabolism, reproduction, and stress responses. The posterior pituitary, which is going to regulate labor contractions, lactation, milk letdown, and water conservation. And the pituitary is attached to the hypothalamus via what's called an infundibulum. Little notch right here. So your hypothalamus is the master coordinator of the endocrine system. And one of the main things that it regulates, that it sends out signals to for other regulation, is the anterior pituitary, the pituitary gland. Any questions so far? The midbrain includes the corpora quadrimana, which includes your superior colliculi. If you look here, there's two bumps right here. There's the superior colliculi and the inferior colliculi. Superior colliculi, inferior colliculi. Right here are your two lateral ventricles to orient us here. So right here. So your superior colliculi, your inferior colliculi. Your superior colliculi are going to be involved in visual attention and visual tracking reflexes. You see something that disturbs you and you keep staring at it. See an accident on the road and you're like, oh. That's the superior colliculi, involved in visual reflexes, being able to track the moving of an object. Inferior colliculi is turning your head in response to a loud sound. And everybody looks up. That's the inferior colliculi. So we call this the corpora quadrimana because there's four of them. Superior colliculi, inferior colliculi. The cerebral peduncles contain the substantia nigra, which we'll talk about in a moment here, is a major motor center that relays inhibitory signals to prevent unwanted movement. Keep that in the back of your mind. So it's a motor center that relays inhibitory signals to avoid unwanted movement. Degeneration of these neurons is what leads to muscle tremors in Parkinson's disease. Avoiding unwanted movement. And that's in the cerebral peduncles right here, right underneath the corpora quadrigemina. The pons, it means a bridge, which consists of nuclei and tracts that relays nerve impulses related to voluntary skeletal movements and coordination from the cerebral cortex to the cerebellum. Voluntary skeletal movements and coordination from the cerebral cortex to the cerebellum. From here to here. Also contains the pneumotaxic center that's going to control breathing rate. And the cranial nerves 4, 6, 7, and 8. One thing that I'll tell you about, I'm telling some stories today, so let me tell you one more. So I've told you about breaking my jaw. One thing that happened when at the time I was when I broke my jaw, I was in the hospital for 4 days. I mean, no, not 4 days, 10 days. I was in the hospital for 10 days. And during that time, about how many days? About 4 days into my stay, I had a morphine-induced respiration suppression. What that means is that I essentially stopped breathing as a result of a morphine overdose, as my mother just said. Well, the fun thing about learning about anatomy and physiology is you learn why that's kind of a big deal and how that actually occurs. Opioids, like morphine, work on this pneumotaxic rhythmicity area. Pneumotaxic meaning breathing rate, rhythmicity meaning breathing. They work on this. And so what occurred during this, what I remember is that I was laying there, and of course, you know, I'd broken my jaw, and then I stopped breathing on them right after the first surgery to fix my jaw. And I had a lot of swelling to my jaw. I was pretty immobile. And I was laying there in the bed in ICU, and all of a sudden just got this massive, massive, massive headache. And it was so bad. And of course, I don't have a lot of energy. I'm really quite immobile at this point. And I get this massive, massive headache that comes on really, really fast, really quickly. And I start, you know, because I'm kind of stuck, you know, I've got IV lines, and I've already, I think they already knew that I was a little struggling with oxygen saturation because I was wearing an oxygen mask at the time. And so I'm already a little confined, and all of a sudden I get this massive headache. So what are you gonna do? I start to yell, and I start to say, look, I have a headache. I have a headache. I have a headache. And I remember I had a nurse in the room, and she she walked out of the room, you know, when I'm yelling there. And I don't know if she walked out to get away from my noise, because I was yelling pretty loud at this point, or if she walked out to find someone to help her with whatever was going on with me. I don't know. But out of frustration, because now I'm by myself in my room, and this headache is just, it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And out of pure frustration at that point, I pulled my oxygen mask back so I could probably yell louder. And I passed out. And that's the last I remember of that. I came to, when I came to, I was very disoriented. I couldn't remember where I was, and I could not, I had a bunch of people on top of my bed, and I couldn't remember how I'd gotten where I was at. And there's a man who was standing in the corner who looked familiar to me, but I didn't know who he was. And come to find out later, that was my surgeon. And so I came out of it very, very disoriented. And I remember they were trying to stick something up my nose. And of course I was fighting them because I couldn't figure out where I was and how I'd gotten it. And at this point, from that adventure, I have a little, I have an arterial line scar, which is where they stick a probe, or, Mom, what is an arterial line? Catheter into an artery. To a machine that monitors your blood pressure. Yeah. Okay. And it can monitor your oxygen. All right. So it's a catheter that's put into an artery that senses your blood pressure and your oxygen saturation. What?
Anyway, it's a catheter built into an artery.
Okay.
But it doesn't monitor the blood pressure.
Okay, so blood pressure, possibly oxygen saturation.
It's also a line where they can get oxygen saturation out of it.
Where they can get oxygen saturations out of that line. They can.
But note for your students.
Go ahead and tell them, Bob. Frontal.
Anoxic headaches are very severe.
Anoxic headaches are really severe.
And they're frontal.
And they're frontal. Okay. So that's what it was. It was an anoxic headache. And they're frontal headaches. And so the reason I told you about the arterial line is, come to find out, they're actually pretty painful when they go in. I can honestly tell you, I don't remember having it put in. And I know that was what the one guy on my bed was doing. What?
That
shows how out of it I was. Because I refer to them as my drug tracks. But that was one of the things that happened. And the whole reason that happened was because opioids work on this right here, this area. And so your breathing rate slows down. The depth of your breathing decreases, and you slowly become hypoxic. And from that adventure, I can tell you that suffocation really hurts. And if you ever hear that suffocation does not hurt, I can tell you it really, really, really hurts. And it's a painful situation. But coming back off that, your medulla oblongata also is involved in this pons area. So this respiratory center, this whole area right here is involved in your autonomic vital life processes, which includes your cardiovascular center, controlling the rate and force of your heartbeat, the diameter of your blood vessels, controlling blood flow, your medullary rhythmicity center, controlling the rate and rhythm of breathing, your vomiting, your coughing, your hiccuping, your deglutition or what is that, swallowing. Sneezing centers are located here, and a lot of other nuclei that we won't discuss. But so this is the area of the brain that opioids act on. Okay, moving on. Upper motor neurons, lower motor neurons. We talked about this before, but you're going to see them when you do the lab exercises again. So upper motor neurons lie in the motor area of the cerebral cortex. Lower motor neurons are going to lie in the gray matter of the spinal cord and brainstem. Upper motor neurons don't innervate things. They synapse, but they don't innervate. They work via the lower motor neurons that innervate the skeletal muscles. So this is all voluntary actions. So upper motor neurons are going to control the activity of lower motor neurons. And lower motor neurons are going to control the voluntary movement of muscles of the voluntary movement of skeletal muscles in the face and periphery. Think of this motor area. Where was the motor areas? They were in the premotor cortex and the motor association area. So that's where in the frontal, sorry, bear with me. Right here. This is where your upper motor neurons are going to be found. Examples of upper motor neurons are the corticospinal tract. We talked about this, and typical spinal nerves and motor cranial nerves. So lower motor neurons are more in the spinal cord and cranial nerve nuclei that are going to project the skeletal muscles. Upper motor neurons are neurons in the primary motor cortex and the cerebral motor cortex, assuming the motor association cortex, and the cerebellum and the basal ganglia that are going to project to motor neurons in the spinal cord or cranial nerve nuclei with somatic motor actions. Basal ganglia, and the cerebellum and the association areas of the motor cortex are going to play a vital role in choice, making decisions about movements, design of those movements, how you're going to carry them out, and monitoring that movement. Making sure that you grab a pencil, but you grab it with just enough force that you hold it, but you don't break it. And you don't hold it too lightly to where it drops, but you hold it with just enough force so that you can hold it but not break it. If you think this would be the way, this would be an area that you would have to use and strengthen and train in order to write handwriting. So upper motor neurons are a motor neuron that originates from the motor region of the cerebral cortex or from the brainstem. Lower motor neurons are going to transmit nerve impulses from the upper motor neurons to the effector skeletal muscles. Upper motor neurons are found in the central nervous system. Lower motor neurons are going to go out to the peripheral nervous system. Upper motor neurons are going to transmit nerve impulses from the brain to the synapses on the lower motor neurons. And lower motor neurons are going to transmit nerve impulses from the upper motor neurons to the muscles. Upper motor neurons are going to form synapses with lower motor neurons. Lower motor neurons are going to form the synapses with the muscles. We're going to talk, when we talk about muscles, we're going to talk about the neuromuscular junction. Upper motor neurons are found in the cerebral cortex or in the brainstem. Lower motor neuron are found in the brainstem and the spinal cord and the peripheral nervous system. Upper motor neurons, the cell bodies are bigger and located in the brain cortex. Lower motor neurons are cell bodies that are small, located in the gray matter. Upper motor neurons are classified based on the pathway they travel in. Lower motor neurons are based on the type of muscle fibers they innervate. Questions? So upper motor neurons, I know some of this is repetition, but repetition is never a bad thing. Upper motor neurons originate in the primary motor cortex and premotor cortex. They run via the corticospinal tract through the midbrain and pons. Most of these fibers are going to decussate. What does decussate mean? What does decussate mean? Somebody tell me. What does decussate mean?
I'm not entirely sure, but isn't it something about crossing the neurons crossing?
That's exactly what it is. It's crossing over, Rachel, it's crossing over. So most of these fibers are going to decussate in the medulla oblongata pyramids. The upper motor neurons, these neurons are then going to synapse on interneurons of the anterior horn in the spinal cord. And the interneurons are going to synapse on lower motor neurons. So the lower motor neurons are what are exiting the anterior horn of the spinal cord. You have questions for me? See how much you're learning? It's a little overwhelming, but the more you look at it, the easier it becomes. The cerebellum plays a major role in the timing of motor activities and in the rapid and smooth progression of movements. It monitors and makes corrective adjustments to the motor plan. You make a plan in the motor association area. Your cerebellum is then going to coordinate and carry out the nerve impulses and make corrections as needed. The basal ganglia, which is in the medulla oblongata, medulla oblongata, is going to help plan and control complex patterns of movement. It's going to be involved in intensifying movement, direction, and sequence. The cerebellum and the basal ganglia have no specific projections to lower motor neurons, but they regulate the activity of upper motor neurons. Substantia nigra, right here, in the midbrain. Actually, I was wrong with the basal ganglia. It's found in the midbrain. I knew that wasn't right. It didn't sound right. So right here, the substantia nigra, Niagara meaning dark, black. So the substantia nigra is part of the basal ganglia and it produces dopamine. What's dopamine? Thinking back on chapter 12, what's dopamine? Someone tell me what's dopamine. If you're not sure, Google it. Tell me what it is on your phone.
It's a neurotransmitter.
It is a neurotransmitter. So the substantia nigra that's part of the basal ganglia is going to produce the neurotransmitter dopamine. Dopamine is going to play a key role in controlling movements via the signals it sends. A healthy balance of dopamine allows for precision of movement, not going too far with a movement, not going too short with a movement. You reach for a pen. You reach for a pen. You don't go past the pen to grab the pen. You don't go before the pen. Dopamine allows you to pick up the pen right at that location where the pen was. You don't go past it. You don't grab before it. You grab the pen. This is due to degeneration of these neurons. Due to the degeneration of these neurons, less dopamine is produced. Parkinson's disease is a degeneration of these neurons. So that's what Parkinson's is this loss of being able to coordinate that movement. Stop. Leo, get down. Do not harass her. I'm sorry, just disciplining my cats. So Parkinson's disease is a degeneration of the neurons in the substantia nigra. They start to degenerate. They stop putting out so much dopamine. And the loss of precise movement starts occurring. Here's a regular, I remember I told you substantia nigra, that Niagara means dark. So this is a very dark area of the midbrain. This is a healthy midbrain substantia nigra. This is an unhealthy substantia nigra. Any questions?
No.
So the cerebellum is involved in the coordination of this movement also. And remember, cerebellum means little brain. Here's your white matter. Here's your gray matter, just like it was in the brain. The major neuron involved here is the Purkinje neurons or Purkinje cells that are found in the cerebral cortex. Here's the fourth ventricle that's involved in the circulation of the cerebrospinal fluid. Here's your corpora quadrumina, your superior colliculi, your inferior colliculi. Here's your pons. Here's your midbrain that has a corpora quadrumina in it. Here's your medulla oblongata. So main functions of the cerebellum. It receives input from motor areas via upper motor neurons. And vestibular neurons in the pons and ascending sensory tracts. These neurons then process and integrate this input. The cerebellum then sends output to the upper motor neurons via the motor cortexes to correct any motor actions or motor error. So it's going to be involved in processing and integrating motor to make it smooth. Keep things smooth and happening in a smooth fashion. So you go to grab the cup of coffee or the cup of hot chocolate. Visual information is required to locate it. The frontal motor areas plan the reach and command of that movement. They decide how you're going to grab that cup. The spinal cord carries the information to the hand. Motor neurons carry that message to the muscles of the hand and forearm. The sensory cortex sends a message back that the cup has been grabbed. The basal ganglia judge the grasping forces, and the cerebellum corrects any movement errors. The spinal cord is going to carry any sensory information back to the brain. So you plan it, you see it, you plan the movement. Spinal cord sends the information to the hand. Motor neurons carry out the message by innervating the muscles involved in picking up that cup. The sensory cortex sends back a message saying that the cup has been grabbed. Basal ganglia are going to judge if we're using enough force when we pick up the cup. And the cerebellum is going to correct for any unwanted movement. And the spinal cord is going to carry the sensory information back to the brain. Just showing general functional relationships. Cerebellum, major coordinator of movement. Basal ganglia chooses which actions to use to perform the movement. Cerebral cortex is involved in thought and planning. The thalamus is the gateway to the cortex. Hypothalamus regulates body functions. Major homeostasis is the hypothalamus. The amygdala is emotion, and the hippocampus is memory. Last part, talking really quickly about cranial nerves, and we'll spend a lot more time talking about this in lecture. But cranial nerves, rather than being spinal nerves, these are cranial nerves because they come directly off the brain stem. They exit the cranium through foramina. Remember, foramina are holes, and they lead to muscles and sense organs located mainly in the head and the neck. Here's your olfactory bulbs. Here's your optic chiasm. Here's the mammillary bodies. Here's the pons. On the opposite side of the medulla oblongata right here would be that corpora quadramina. The cranial nerves are numbered according to how they arise off the brain stem. This is the cranial nerve number 1, the olfactory nerve. Cranial nerve number 2, the optic nerve. Cranial nerve number 3, the oculomotor nerve. Actually, it's 3. Yeah, it is. Cranial nerve number 3. The trochlear nerve is cranial nerve number 4. The trigeminal nerve is cranial nerve number 5. The abducens nerve is cranial nerve number 6. The facial nerve is cranial nerve number 7. The vestibular cochlear nerve is cranial nerve number 8. The glossopharyngeal nerve is cranial nerve number 9. The vagus nerve is cranial nerve number 10. The hypoglossal nerve is cranial nerve number 12 because we're going to learn cranial nerve number 11 and 12 switch places. Here's the cranial nerve number 11. So hypoglossal nerve is cranial nerve number 12. And the spinal accessory nerve is cranial nerve number 12. 11. For lecture, you need to remember the order of these. A mnemonic for remembering the order is on occasion our trusty truck, olfactory, optic, oculomotor, trochlear, trigeminal, axe, bunny, abducens, and facial. Very good vehicle anyhow. And then you want to remember whether they're involves predominantly in always sensory, always motor, or both sensory and motor. Some say money matters, but my brother says big brains matter more. Now, I have different mnemonics that I remember. If you look online, there are lots of mnemonics for learning the cranial nerves. There are lots and lots and lots of them. I have one for you that I have actually two, but the one I'm not going to share, knowing my mother's in the other room. But the one I'll share with you right here. And I like this one. If you go on, like I said, if you go online, there are so many mnemonics for learning the cranial nerves. The one that I remember the easiest and that's the cleanest is it's related to Harry Potter. And I love the Harry Potter books. And so this one is very easy for me to remember. And it says, on, they traveled and found Voldemort, guarding very ancient Horcruxes. What this says is optic is first. Optic, cranial nerve number 1. No, olfactory. Olfactory is cranial nerve number 1. Optic is cranial nerve number 2. Oculomotor is cranial nerve number 3. Trochlear is cranial nerve number 4. Traveled is trigeminal nerve. Abducens is cranial nerve number 6. Facial is cranial nerve number 7. Voldemort is cranial nerve. Oh, wait. Yeah. Voldemort is cranial nerve, the vestibular cochlear nerve, cranial nerve number 8. Glossopharyngeal is cranial nerve number 9. Mom, can you hear me?
I wasn't listening to ask you that.
Okay. All right. I'm not going to share you the colorful one because she can hear me. But cranial nerve number 10 is the vagus nerve. Cranial nerve number 11 is the accessory nerve. Cranial nerve number 12 is the hypoglossal nerve. Now, how do we remember that they're sensory, motor, or both? Some say, some say money matters, so sensory, motor. But both, it's sensory and motor. My meaning motor, big, both. Brother, my brother says big bucks matter more. So sensory, let's hear. Some say motor, brother, both. Says sensory, no, both. I'm sorry. Some say money matters, motor, but both. My motor, brother, both. Says sensory. Big, both. Bucks, both. Matter, motor, and motor, Horcruxes matter more. Any questions? Obviously, we have like 3 minutes until class is over. And so I'm not going to try to go into chapter 14. We will finish chapter 14 on Tuesday. And we'll go from there. I will open the 4th lab quest this evening. And it will include 16, 17, and 19 and 20 lab exercises. I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, you too.
You too.
Mary? Just a sec, Mom.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, I just had a quick question.
No.
So, I had emailed yesterday
Yeah.
about some assignments.
Is this Michaela?
Yes.
Okay.
Is there any way, like the ones that I wasn't able to finish, would I be able to finish them?
Yes. Right. So in an email, and I'm trying, I looked over your email last night, but I went to bed really late and I cannot remember
that's
exactly.
fine. I had wrote you like really late because I was like about to be off of work. So
okay, I understand. Write down send me an email with what assignments.
Okay.
And then give me an approximate date as to when you'll have them done.
Okay.
And yes,
all right, that works.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome, of course.
Have a good day.
You too. Jesse, did you have something similar to that? You're there? Courtney, are you there?